greater than X.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to a game review discussion here at Carpool Gaming. I'm one of your hosts, Ryan Turford, and I'm joined by the Supreme Court of Canada, Mr. Court Lalonde. How are you doing, Court?
I'm good, buddy. How are you?
I'm good. I'm very excited to talk to you about this game because the game in question today is Gotham Knights. And of course, you know, to talk about a Batman game, I needed to bring in Carpool Gaming's Batman expert over there with Court because, you know, it's one of those things where I know Batman from, you know, the movies and stuff and the animated series and the Arkham games, but I don't know Batman the way Court knows Batman. So I'm very excited to talk about this.
I've ever since this movie that's behind me right there, 89 Batman, I've been obsessed to say the least. I've been reading the comics since 1989 still. Nice. So I've been following along and I love it. This game, well, we'll talk about it.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. So we're going to go, you know, full on spoilers with some of the story stuff a little bit later in this discussion. But I kind of wanted to start this discussion, first of all, non-spoilery. So if you haven't played the game already, or if you're still on the fence, especially because I'm glad we're doing this review now, Court, because this will go live on Friday, AKA the day that all the Black Friday sales are going on, and this game will be on sale. So I think a lot of people are going to be picking this up for the first time. So that's the main reason I wanted to start non-spoiler with some of this stuff. So I want to start, first of all, now that we've talked about a little bit about, you know, where we are as far as Batman fans and stuff like that. I wanted to know from you, Court, what your experiences are with the Arkham games. You've played all of them, I'm assuming. Like you've been playing the Batman games for years and years. I know, again, This isn't in the same universe. But
nope. It was a bit of a disappointment that it wasn't. Mm-hmm. I understand WB Montreal wanting to do something different. Yeah. I get that. But one of my biggest complaints right off the bat was they perfected the combat system in the Arkham games. They actually made that combat system the superhero combat system. You play Spider-Man, it's based off the combat system from the Arkham games. And then they decided in this game, they were like, let's do something different. Sometimes I get it trying to go a different direction when you're, you know, in certain aspects, but when something has been perfected, maybe let's just continue that way. You can do little tweaks on it, like, you know, Insomniac did with Spider-Man, but especially because you're using more, I would say, acrobatic characters, like within Nightwing, compared to what Batman is. You could put little tweaks that way, but to just have that punch and heavy attack and low attack was very disappointing, and it kind of made the combat system mundane and boring.
Yeah. I mean, it's one thing to try something different, because I do think I actually agree with the decision of doing something different. First of all, you know, being the RPG person of the, you know, Carpool Gaming, you know, knowing that this game is a role-playing game first and foremost, you know, I was totally down with that idea. Like, I love the idea of doing like more superhero RPGs. Like Garrett and I have talked about it before on the RPG Cave about how I think we need more superhero RPGs, because I think like
100% agree.
Those two aesthetics really come together in an interesting way. But basically taking the Batman Arkham style combat and simplifying it and then adding RPG elements is not the way I think you get there. Like, I don't think that it works super well, you know, with its mission statement of being an RPG, especially when you compare it to other action RPGs out there where I didn't hate the combat or anything. Like, I think I'm probably a little bit higher on the combat than you are, Court, but not by much. Like, I'm not like, you know, singing the praises of this or anything like that. And especially coming out off, you know, playing Star Ocean, The Divine Force and Valkyrie Elysium, two games that I felt like had really strong, you know, JRPG combat, like action RPGs. And then coming to this, it just felt so much more sluggish versus those two games.
Yeah, like I did like the special moves that each character had, but also at the same time, we have 4 characters and I just ended up using one throughout my gameplay. I did try them all. I tried every single character. I used Red Hood. I used Robin. I even started the game as Batgirl because that's who I thought I was going to main. And then I ended up using Nightwing, and I was just like, I don't need to switch back. Like he's a decent character. He has he's like overall the better character. I was not a fan of Red Hood at all. Surprising enough, a lot of people I know actually used him as a main, but and that's another part that I had was with the 4 different characters and the way the story went. I have looked it up there are points of the story that change based on the character you're using, just the conversations. But I felt they didn't utilize the 4 characters properly.
Right.
I would rather have them done playing the first mission itself. I felt that was a definite stealth mission. So that should have been Batgirl. I don't think they should have gave us a choice on which character we use. I think it should have been this, and I think the story would have been better because the story had a lot of potential, and we'll get to that later, but I think it just went down the wrong path. And it could be that this game was actually originally made to be something that it isn't when it finally came out, because I have a funny feeling, and this is just my opinion here, that this game was supposed to be always online game, a lot like Allo the Avengers. The Avengers didn't do well and they pivoted. And that's why we ended up with the game we got and a little bit of a jumbled mess in certain parts.
Yeah.
That's just what I see from playing the game.
I'm trying to remember. I believe like when we first saw this game and when they announced it at DC Fandom, I think it was 2019 or 2018. I think it's 2019. That was before the Avengers actually came out though.
Yeah.
So I don't, and when they showed it originally, they had mentioned, because someone had asked about it, if it was a live service game or an online only game. And at that time they said no. So it is possible that they pivoted, but I think that this was kind of always the vision. Just if I go back to that kind of a original announcement, if I replay it in my mind, I'm actually thinking I think this is the way that they intended it. But maybe it might have worked better as a live service game. But to your point, Court, I actually think you're spot on as far as because then they could have tailored the levels to specific characters.
Correct.
So Robin could have had the stealthier levels, and then Red Hood could have all the levels where you're fighting like big enemies, like because he's so slow and sluggish that I think you and I both agree, like we both just don't like playing as that character. So.
No, he's not a good character. It just would have added more variety to the game, and then the combat wouldn't have felt so samey, right? Because you're just playing the same over character. And yes, while you're playing the game, you have to stop crimes or activities throughout each night. And you actually need to do them to progress the story, because they don't let you progress the story unless you interrogate and do these things. But I just felt sometimes even the conversations that were being had, I'm like, this is not really being directed at Nightwing, but I'm using Nightwing. Like, this is weird. Yeah. Like they could have just, and maybe they wanted to give us free roam, but I think to make the story, because it's also still a story. Like Final Fantasy, as much as they're not games for me all the time, Final Fantasy VII did such a good job of story in an RPG. And a lot of games do very good jobs. I felt that the story felt disjointed in this game, and sometimes just didn't make any sense for the character I was using. Well,
also, like, with going with that point, a game I actually recently reviewed earlier this week was Star Ocean: The Divine Force from Square Enix. And in that game, what's interesting about it is that you have like 8 players in your party, but when the game starts, they're like, do you want to play as this person or this person? And depending on which of the 2 people you pick, the story is tailored to that person. You still fight all the same bosses and still go all to the same locations, except for there are actually a couple sections of the story whereas if you're playing as one person, you'll go to a different dungeon and fight a different boss than the other person. But for the most part, all the conversations are tailored towards the person that you chose at the very beginning for the story. And that's maybe how they should have done it in this game, where maybe you make a choice at the beginning, like which person you want to be like the lead character. And then maybe you have all the dialogue directed towards that person as the lead character.
Or even the characters weren't bad.
Yeah. Or like even have like certain cutscenes where all 4 characters are in there. Or, if the conversation pertains to, Nightwing and Robin, maybe they're the people you see in the cutscene instead of the person you're playing as. Like they could have gone in a bunch of different directions, I think, with this.
And I did look back at the original E3 when they showed the whole Iceman boss battle and stuff. Yeah. Yeah, they did a whole Houdini act on how good that game looked. Because it didn't, as I was climbing the ice castle there, I'm just like, yeah, this does not look like what I remembered. So then I went back and watched the trailer. And I'm like, nope, not even close. Okay.
The hilarious thing about that too, Court, was that was back when this was only supposed to be a PlayStation 4 and Xbox One game, and not a PlayStation 5 game or a Xbox Series X game at all. Which is just funny.
I truly think, even though this game was delayed and they had to cut it out because they know shareholders and such, I still think this game should have been delayed.
Yeah. You're not wrong, especially because we saw we've seen a lot of patches come out even since then to fix a lot of the small issues or fix some of the performance stuff. There was a huge patch that just came out today on PC for the game.
Yeah.
That they were talking
And
about.
I played it, and I did not enjoy my time. I thought it was a very good PlayStation 4, Xbox One game.
Yeah.
It wasn't a next gen game. It was very good last gen game. As someone who loves the whole Gotham aesthetic, I felt the city to be bare and empty. There's like maybe 5 cars on the road. Even when you do those Bat Cycle time trials, there's never anything in your way. Like they're so easy. Like it doesn't matter. There's barely any. The only people that are in this world are criminals. Otherwise, there's nothing else there. A bunch of cars that go really slow. And then the other thing is when you get the glider finally, it doesn't really go fast. It's got a jet engine on it. And it takes like an hour to get across the map.
I love that that whole mission where you get the glider too. They're like, this will make it so much faster for you to get around. And I'm like, it's actually slower than using the Bat Cycle or the grappling hook.
100%. The best thing you got to do in this game, my number one tip for everybody, is unlock fast travel. Once you meet Lucius Fox, he'll give you a mission to get these satellites. He actually doesn't do it right away. You actually have to find them there's no markers on the map. You just got to like find them. Once you find one, and it's actually on top of the base in the game. If you go to the very top of the skyscraper, you'll see one, you'll find it. And then you can unlock fast travel throughout the game. Cause I suggest you do that right away. But then they also had missions that didn't like their side missions. It didn't make sense. I thought they did a very good job of introducing, Harley, Mr. Freeze, and these enemies that you can fight. And I could see potential in DLC and just adding those enemies to the world. I thought they did a good job with the Penguin, the Harley, those stories. But I thought they did a terrible job of putting it all together with the Court of Owls.
Yeah. Like, it felt disjointed. Like they kind of existed on their own. It almost didn't. In fact, it almost didn't matter if you did them at all. If you just let them
100%
at that point, it's just extra experience at that point.
Yeah. And that's not how a Batman story goes in the comics or even in the previous Arkham games. They always kind of put it all together. And especially in a Batman comic, they all live in the same universe. And like you said, disjointed, it felt like they were in a different universe.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was trying to be. I think that was the point, which not in a good way. It was definitely felt like it was in a different universe, but not in a good way. Or just different.
It was so weird.
Different. But so obviously, you already answered the next question I was going to have, who you played as. Obviously, you played as Nightwing. I also wanted to play as Batgirl as well, because I was like, ooh, I've always wanted like a Batgirl video game. Like I thought that idea would be super cool. But I just didn't really like the way she played as well. So, of course, you could probably guess, Court. I was Robin because I'm a stealth person.
I liked him as a character as well, too.
Yeah.
My biggest issue was when he spoke in the game, he annoyed me.
Oh, exactly. That's why, I kind of cringed at some of the cutscenes that he was in, where I was like, man. I almost want to switch characters just because I don't love his cutscenes or the way he interacts with some of the villains. But his suite of stealth skills was too good for me to pass up, because it was just I would just go in half the game and not be seen. So, which was great.
Well, that's the other thing. It was so weird because they still had the mechanics of going above and being able to attack from above, but they really took away what you had in Batman of coming down, picking up the guy. And it was just,
well, you unlock that ability as Robin where you can string a dude up, but everyone sees it and it alerts everyone. And I'm like, well, I'm never going to use this at this point. I'm just going to do silent takedowns instead. Unlocking this skill was a mistake.
Yeah. And then they had all these chests that you could open to give you things. And it was just the noise that it made when you unlocked the chest was very weird, very un-Batman-y, very just, I don't know, it didn't fit the game. It didn't make any sense. And then it was almost like I didn't care. Upgrading my character really didn't matter.
Yeah. Well,
nothing about, except for upgrading his power level. That's all that mattered. Upgrading the power level of your character, that is all that matters. And it's very easily to do. If you don't have to really actually open those chests, you could just finish missions. I don't know, man. It felt like there was a game there and they just tripped over themselves while they were making it. Yeah.
I mean, a lot of that has to do with the level scaling, I think, because if this game didn't have level scaling, I think that, and you had different quadrants of the city that were, higher level, lower levels, it actually would have made it easier to traverse everything before you, before you got fast travel. Because then you could get to all the side crimes and stuff a little bit easier, because you'd probably focus on one of the islands that is around your item level or your character's level. But two, like again, if you didn't continue to upgrade your armor along the way, that was the thing that mattered the most, to your point, where it was like you have to match the power level of whatever is being scaled to your character at that point. Essentially, your character level almost doesn't matter except for what skills you have available to you at that point. So it just, you're right about that, because I think the combat balance, I think, really suffered because of that. And again, that really hinders your ability to do stealth as well, because, in the Arkham games, regardless of, what level Batman is at, he's able to, one shot stealth kill the enemies or, knock them out. I should say kill so liberally with Batman.
But I like your point of maybe doing the islands the way you described it, because it would have, first off, they have collectibles throughout the world, but you don't actually know how many you need for each area unless you actually collect one in that area, and then it tells you. And there's no way to look it up after the fact, which is kind of frustrating. Mm-hmm. But maybe that would have given you, hey, do I want to go see if I can upgrade my guy by going into a bigger power level and seeing if I can take the combat? Because we always know in an RPG that'll get you more experience points that way, and you can level up your character faster, and choose that. Or do I want to just take out this whole island and go from there? And then they could have made each island had its main villain plus the Court of Owls in each, because I ended up completing the Court of Owls story, not purposely, and then it automatically took away all those nests off the whole Penguin side story. That was gone. And I'm like, well, I didn't know. I actually liked going into the net. I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. Why did they do that?
Yeah, it's just
because they only linked the Penguin with the Court of Owls and no one else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because like when I came up with the idea, I was really thinking back to like games like Infamous, for example, which were designed that way, where it's like, you unlock the islands one at a time, and you could go to the other ones if you want to, but you'll probably get murdered. Also, if you really want a fun challenge, which is actually what I did for a little while, Court. I since I got the collector's edition of the game, it came with all the deluxe edition of the game, which comes with all the Batman Beyond suits, and the Batman Beyond suits give you extra XP bonuses. They start at they're level 1 suits, so they're very weak, or at least they're good starting suits because they're better than your starting equipment. But you can the experience buff never goes away until you take the suit off. So you can actually play through as much as the game as you can stomach with the combat while getting like double XP. But if you get hit by the enemies, you'll get like 1 or 2 shotted eventually. Like I got to like level 20 before I was like, all right, I guess I'm gonna change out my armor at this point.
Well, I will admit, thanks to a friend of mine over at DC, that's where I got a copy of my game. I had all that stuff, and I didn't even pay attention enough to use them. I was just like, oh, I'm not a big Batman Beyond. So I was like, oh, I don't want to use those characters. They look really weird, the suits.
But then you can transmog
and now you're telling
suits.
me this, and I could have done that.
You can transmog the suits even to make them look like the other suits, which is what I did. I know,
but I got to the point where I just didn't care about what the suit was. I was just like, I wanted it to look as closest to what the comics did, so I just choose that suit, and then I was just like, whatever. Because it was, I don't know, it was extremely frustrating as a huge fan, because I felt the story could have been so much more. And I think that's my biggest thing about it, because the gameplay loop wasn't all that bad. It had me enough that I did at one point, I couldn't stop playing. I was like, oh my God, I'm actually liking this game. And we haven't even got to the 30 frames per second yet, but I was like, I was actually liking it. And then with the choices they made with the story, I'm like, nope, now I don't like it again.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, right before because I think we'll transition to the story in 1 second, but I do want to touch on the performance of the game as well, because
makes sense.
First of all, I've noticed a marketable difference from when the game launched versus now. Playing the game on Xbox, I feel like the game is smoother. It still only runs at 30 frames per second, but I'm not running into any of the weird glitches or the drops in frame rates that I was getting when the game first launched. But I'm just like questioning I hate to say this because I hate to question when developers make decisions like this, but why did this game need ray tracing the way that it did? Because I feel like that's the reason why it is 30 frames per second, because they didn't because they have ray tracing enabled and they didn't want to turn it off, because sure, the ray tracing looks nice with the puddles and stuff while you're driving, the back
Does
cycle.
It though? I was hating it when the water was going down your suit. It just looked like it was like digitally, it would look like the Matrix. Like it didn't look like real water coming down during the cutscenes. I thought the ray tracing didn't add anything to it. And I almost will say that Batman Arkham series looks better than this game does.
Yeah. Well, especially with like when you look at the comparisons that Digital Foundry did between the rain in Arkham Knight versus the rain in this game, and then the way it looks like on Batman's suit and stuff like that. Like it just I don't know. I agree. I think it actually probably looks better without it at this point. So it's just, it made me question the decision of why include ray tracing then. Because again, we've seen developers offer all kinds of modes for their games. And usually the ray tracing mode is always the 30 frames mode. And then when you remove ray tracing, it's usually the 60 frames per second mode. So I wish we could.
Yeah, or at least give us the toggle switch. Like I'm sure we're going to get something in the future. But if you're doing a combat heavy game, try and get as many frames per second as possible.
Yeah, because like when I first picked up the game, honestly, I didn't hate the 30 frames per second. It
Same.
wasn't until I went and reviewed a bunch of other games, like Star Ocean, for example. I came off that 60 frames per second, no problem, flying around the screen like Batman probably should be doing in that game. And then I go back to this game, you know, like 2 weeks later, I'm like, oh my God, oh no, it feels like I'm running in water at this
super
point.
slow. Yeah. So like for me, I had the biggest, and I know you know this, like I was playing it and then you messaged me and you're like, you can stop playing it. I know you have to play God of War. So I started playing God of War, which was super smooth, looked beautiful, a phenomenal combat. And then I went back to playing Batman and I remember putting the thing, I'm like, yeah, so this isn't fun anymore. I'm like, it felt like you said, it felt like all of a sudden I got stuck in a puddle and I was just moving super slow-mo.
Yeah. And again, once you get used to it again, it's totally fine. But it's just like, I definitely felt it when going back to it after playing other games that are, you know, action RPGs running at 60 frames per second. So
I have to agree.
There is that. So we'll transition to the story now, Court. So real quick before we do spoilers, because this is the part of the conversation now where I think people who wanted a spoiler-free experience are probably going to drop off here. So I want you to compose a tweet in your head and then tell me that tweet length response. What do you think about the story, spoiler-free in like a tweet?
For me, so 100.
Just keep it short.
There was a lot of potential that was unmet.
Okay.
You're in for a roller coaster ride that for some reason doesn't have any tracks.
That's
1980s like movie poster there.
Yeah. As for me, I didn't hate the story. I think I'm a little bit higher in the story than you, but I also, again, haven't seen the ending. So I think that might play in a little bit into that.
It's not good.
But at the same time, it's fine. It exists. To our points earlier, don't go into this game playing for the story. I think I think you'll have a better time if you almost ignore the story or just play it because you enjoy the act of playing an open world superhero game over that. But anyways, we'll transition into the story now in full spoilers. So this is your warning, both audio listeners and viewers on YouTube. We are now going into full spoilers. Ryan, throw that spoiler tag down there. That's right. Thanks, future Ryan, for throwing that spoiler tag. All right, Court, you're officially off the leash now. Now I'm going to, preface this again. I haven't finished the game. I'm about 20 hours in. But honestly, I focused a lot more on side missions and stuff anyways. So I'm not like even super far into the story anyways, because I wasn't, to your point, I wasn't really super enjoying the story anyways. I just didn't care. So Court, I want you to hit me with it. Give me your spoilery thoughts on this.
So I alluded to it before. We have your main baddies, I guess we'll call them. You're first introduced to the Penguin, but he's not really. He's really just a.
He's kind of a curmudgeon.
He's like a nothing. Like he's his. You go to his to the Iceberg Lounge once, and you take out all the guys in there, and so every time you go back, they're already knocked out every time. So he becomes a nothing. And he kind of pushes around the story of the Court of Owls. He kind of introduces everything. Mm-hmm. And then you get introduced to Harley Quinn, who very, very well done. Whoever the voice actress in that and the, how they handled that character, I thought it was very true to the comic books, and I thought they did a very good job. And Harley Quinn is a very hard one to do ever since the animated series kind of perfected it. She's amazing in that. And so it's just, it's hard to not do that. And this person did a different perspective on the Harley Quinn character, and I thought they did a good job. And then we also had Mr. Freeze, who I felt was very lackluster, and the double boss fight with him was a little bit weird. I thought it was like prolonged it for no apparent reason, and all of a sudden he's in this giant like mech suit, and I'm just like, I don't know. It was weird to go to that.
He pulled the Lex Luthor with Mr. Freeze.
It didn't make any sense. I was like, a lot to do with Mr. Freeze's character, has a lot to do with his wife, and everything wasn't in there. I didn't feel the urgency with him, and he's that's kind of his thing. And then we had the Court of Owls. And I forgot. And Clayface, which Clayface is like 2 seconds.
Yeah, he's barely in the game. I was just like, well, because I saw the achievements ahead of time. I was like, oh, Clayface is going to be in this game. And I was like, oh, Clayface was in this game he was gone. He was there.
And he wasn't that hard of a boss fight, and they could have done so much more with him and prolonged it. I didn't really feel like I was a detective in the game. They didn't do that. And in any Batman, regardless whether it's not even Batman, whether it's anything in the Batman universe, there's usually detective aspects to it. They kept making us go to these crime scenes where you would look at the same body lying on the ground and have the same clues in different orders, and then you had to like put them somewhere. But if you couldn't figure it out, it was just like, do you want to skip this? And you're like, yeah, because I don't care. Like, you're not giving me any information. It felt like all the little side quests and the little clues that you had to go didn't lead anywhere to any point of the story. Even the very beginning where we follow the scientist, I felt like there was no answer. That scientist didn't matter. And the Court of Owls themselves were first introduced in the Batman comics in the New 52 series by Capello and Schneider. And that series is by far one of the best Batman series in the last 20 years. And I would highly recommend anybody just go get the graphic novel of it, just so you can read the Court of Owls story, because it's so compelling. And they did such a fresh look on the Batman series that no one had ever done. Everybody always redoes the Joker story, does all these things. And these two people over at DC decided to turn it on its head and do things that were happening in the background and take all these things that were always there in the back of the Batman shows and actually give us answers to it. They decided, hey, those things that they never gave you answers on, this is why this was happening. And I felt the Court of Owls, one, to a disappointment as a Batman fan, it should have been Batman. If you're going to introduce the Court of Owls in anything, it should be Talon, who is the main tough guy for the Court of Owls, who, like, in the comics is almost invincible, but for some reason in this he comes back, he dies, and then he dies again very quickly. You're using other characters to hunt down the Court of Owls, and you're not really hunting them. Like, going into their nest was kind of cool, but I felt like they didn't expand on it. And the Court of Owls story portion of it, I swear it's only like 2 hours. And they were toting this as this big thing. And it's technically has nothing to do with the ending of the game, because even though they come back at the end, it's like you take out Mr. Kane and then that's it. Like, they take all the little side quests out of there. They automatically are gone. So if you haven't done them, they disappear off the map and you can't do them anymore, which is very weird. But the Court of Owls is such a mysterious type of character, and you could have done so much more detective wise with this, of how you find it out and learning other things and other things that are going on the background, because the Court of Owls is this group of people that are pulling the strings from the background, the elite of Gotham, that are actually in charge of everything that you just don't realize. And I felt that they really didn't expand on that or make me care. I cared because I know the story, but if someone's just meeting them for the first time in this game, they're not going to be like, oh my God, I got to go buy the New 52 series and learn more about them. They're going to be like, wow, they're kind of pointless. And so that is, as much as this is not supposed to be a Batman game, even though, kind of is still. If you're going to do the Court of Owls, it should have been a Batman game, and they could have done a whole game of it and not even had these side characters. I almost thought the Court of Owls shouldn't even have been in there, and they should have just done everything else, because I think they did a disservice to the Court of Owls.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that, Court, because I'm someone that hasn't read the Court of Owls storyline, and I've heard so many great things about the Court of Owls storyline that I'm like, hey, I'm excited that there's going to be a Court of Owls video game, because again, that was what they were teasing before we even saw the initial announcement for this game. So I was like, oh, I'm actually really excited for this. But it felt like they were trying to take two completely different storylines, like two, different Batman arcs, and like do this and like shove them together and see if it stuck together. And the Court of Owls in this game, to your point, totally throwaway. I was just like, well, okay, these are slightly tougher dudes that I'm fighting in the street. and they don't really matter to the story. And I don't get why people like them so much.
I totally get that, because I feel bad, because even the collector's editions, they came with some of them came with Court of Owls masks. And I know originally WB was sending Court of Owls masks out to influencers and such. And I'm just like, wow, this is so exciting. And I even know someone who works at DC, and they're like, you're going to be so excited for this. Like I've heard they're doing great things. Never played it. They never did anything. They just said, I've heard they're doing great things. And like, if you like the Court of Owls, you're going to like this. But as a Batman fan, I came out of it feeling disappointed. I won't give away the ending, even though we're doing spoilers, because I think, you know what? The ending is the ending, and that's not fair to anybody. And Ryan hasn't seen the ending, so we're going to leave it at that.
We kind of already talked about it a little bit off the call.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, we did talk about, still at the same time, I was very disappointed in the ending. Ryan guessed the ending. So I asked him a question and he guessed it. So it's pretty obvious.
Very predictable.
Yeah, it's extremely predictable. And I also thought that was another thing. Everything about this game seemed very predictable story-wise. Like even the second boss fight for Mr. Freeze was like, well, he's not done. He's coming back. Like, who are we kidding? Woo. They're going to do these things. And then even the side characters that you were meeting up with, like because Gordon is no longer there and all this, I just didn't care. They didn't give me any background about these characters, except I've read the comics, so I know some of them. But at the same time, I didn't care. And the nurse that I'm going to meet, I just didn't care. I only did their side quests to get the XP at the end of it. It had nothing to do with actually finishing the story, because their side quest didn't, they're like, go interrogate this guy. Okay, I've done that. Oh, like four things later, you're going to get asked to do the exact same thing over again. And you're just like, okay, whatever. I think what you mentioned before about the 3 separate islands would have made this game a lot better and had each island have its own story, and just don't do the Court of Owls. Yeah.
Or like, hey, have the Court of Owls have their own island, and then the story, like the middle of the story, for example, maybe focuses on them. Then you don't have them come back for the big finale. Maybe their involvement sets up a bigger plot that you then have to fight on the third island. Like maybe that's.
And even when they do come back at the end, I didn't care. I didn't even understand why they were there again, because I hadn't seen them for so long. I'm like, I don't know what man, it's frustrating. As a Batman fan, this game frustrated me. I still finished it. I'm going to finish any Batman product they put out there, but I'm frustrated with this game.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, as a non-Batman fan, again, it's just like, well, this isn't even nearly as strong as any of the other Batman media I've seen. Like even the Arkham games, I felt like they all had better stories than the one that I've played here. And again, I haven't finished it or anything like that. And I didn't, hate what I played or anything, but I just felt like the story itself was probably the weakest element of this game from what I played so far. And from the sounds of it, it doesn't get any better towards the end.
No. And I think it has a lot to do with how the characters they chose in the story. I almost think they would have been better off making you from the point of view of a villain, because unfortunately, even in the comics, Nightwing has a very good story arc. And so does Batgirl. But Robin doesn't in the comics. He doesn't do that well on his own unless he has Batman. And Red Hood, I could do without in the comics. He's just kind of a curmudgeon, as you would say, Ryan. He's just always angry. Like, he has a good right to be, Joker did smash him over the face with a tire iron and kill him, and then he had to come back. But I don't know. If you're going to make a Gotham game, just make it a Batman game. Just make it easier on yourself. And if you're going to add these characters, then make levels designed towards these characters, because I just felt like they were just afterthoughts. If you didn't use them, they were an afterthought.
Which is actually what they did with Arkham Knight, if you remember, because they did all the DLC. You didn't really play as Batman. You had the Batgirl DLC, you had the Nightwing DLC, and they were, levels and stories specifically for those characters rather than them being kind of like doing what they did in this game. But
I agree. And it was good. That was good. Like, I truly enjoyed the Arkham series. And I know before I started playing this game, someone who was reviewing it messaged me and they were like, hey, just get it out of your head that the Arkham System series ever existed. And I'm like, well, that doesn't make any sense to me. And I get what they're trying to say, because they're trying to say, hey, look at this game differently. But if you're using a property that has already existed with regards to Batman and the universe it's in, you can't not think about the other things. It's like when Matt Reeves' Batman just came out in the theaters, you're going to compare it to the rest of the Batmans. Matt Reeves' Batman's freaking amazing. But what I'm saying is you're going to compare it. And if you don't do better, then it's not good enough.
Yeah. And likewise, we just don't review games in a vacuum. It doesn't work that way. We don't pretend like no other, like this is the only game that we played this year and there wasn't anything else. Because even again, if I don't even compare it against other Batman games, if I think of it as its own game, as an RPG, and compare it to other action RPGs, like other games in its genre, it still kind of falls flat with a lot of what our action RPGs I played just this year, let alone other action RPGs that are out
Avengers
there.
was better.
I don't know if I'm ready to say that yet. I still think I like this more than Avengers.
So my thing about Avengers is I thought they did a phenomenal job on the story of the game. The rest of it I could do without, but I didn't find the story. I thought the story dropped off and it just got very convoluted and confusing.
Yeah, the second you get Captain America back in the Avengers story, that's where it kind of falls off.
Yes, 100%. When they all of a sudden put her in the background, but in this, they right off the bat it gets confusing. And it's just like, okay.
Yeah. Because likewise, I think that the reason I like this more than Avengers still, because I'm like you, I actually really like the Avengers single player in particular. Like I love the story in Avengers and the way that play, like I loved going through the campaign. But this game, I actually enjoyed the combat loop more. And for me, that's more what my focus is on anyways. And I'm less about the story when it comes to games like this. So I think that's why I like Gotham Knights a little bit more, because I like just the act of playing this game more than the act of playing Avengers. So I think that's why I put it a little bit above. But definitely, if we're talking about story and we're comparing this story to the Avengers story, 100% I agree with you. The Avengers story was way better than this.
Yeah, it's weird. And like I said before, Gotham being this empty void just didn't make any sense, because Gotham even in the comics is a character itself. In the movies, we've all seen it. Gotham is almost this living, breathing character, even though it's a city. And in this, it was just an empty city with crimes in every corner.
Yeah. Exactly. Or again, like to your point, like the same dead body that you have to go investigate. And it's like, all right, which one of these clues points to where they went? And it's like, and a lot of times it didn't make any sense. It's like, well, why does the bullet hole's trajectory tell me where they went? Like it
makes no sense.
Yeah.
It was very weird on the way they did it. Batman is a detective story. Every part of the Batman universe is a detective story, and nothing about this game was a detective story.
Yeah. Whew. Well, Court, I feel like we've preached.
Yeah.
We've got we've exercised our demons a little bit on this game. We've talked about it. We've now gotten it out of our systems a little bit. We've talked about this game quite a bit. So I think we're going to kind of wrap up our conversation here. So where can people find you on the internet, Court?
Well, you can find me at Court Lalonde on Twitter or at Carpool Gaming on Twitter. And then you can find us at Carpool Gaming on YouTube.
Very nice. And as for me, you can find me on Twitter at Ryan Turford. Well, anyways, for Court Lalonde, I'm Ryan Turford. This has been the Gotham Knights Extra Mile review discussion, whatever we're calling these things now. And we're out.